Welcome to the annual plan budget overview. Yeah, I will just pass straight over to the team on this one. We've got a lot to work through here, and it's really going to be a bit of a direction setting for you guys, but obviously we've got a bit more understanding too of the state of play, if you will. So yeah, I'll pass straight over to Man. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So hopefully you've all had a chance to read the slides. Much of the information inside it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. In terms of the point of today, obviously last week, if you flip to the next slide, last week we had the first workshop on the annual plan, had a bit of an introduction to what is required in the annual plan, asked for a bit of direction on some key things. Discussed a little bit about engagement, whether we needed to engage or what we could engage on, fees and charges overview, and a bit of an overview on the budget, what to expect today. Today, we've got a 1 hour quick sharp briefing on the operating budgets and the capital budgets, all the projects that we had in the long-term plan to complete in the 27 financial year. And then on the 14th of April, we've got our last workshop, which will present the draft annual plan document and any other updates. Then in terms of council meetings, there will be a report to council at the end of April to make a decision about engagement. And then the 23rd of June, we ultimately need to set the fees and charges and adopt the 27 annual plan, which includes setting the rates for the 27 financial year as well. We must do that before 1 July or else we will have no income next year. No rates income. Next slide. So just a bit of a, just to recap, this slide was similar to one Mandy discussed last week. So just in terms of the budget side of it, the long-term plan is our key strategic document that contains our 9-year budget. Typically, it's a 10-year budget, but we chose to defer. So instead of completing a 2024-34 10-year long-term plan, we decided to delay it for a year into 2025 because of the uncertainty around waters. So that's the front page of our long-term plan. Hopefully you're all familiar with it. Most of you that were here last year spent a good 20 months pulling that document together. And a lot of the meetings that we had throughout that process were in terms of the operating budgets, and a lot of time was spent going through the projects listing. So for the annual plan, it's produced in between our long-term plan cycle. So this one is just simply an update for what we indicated to do in year 2 of the long-term plan. So the long-term plan first year was the 26th financial year that we're currently in. The second year is next year, 2027, up to 30 June 2027. The point of an annual plan is to pick up what we had planned to do in that long-term plan and update, like have a sense check, make sure that we're still on track to complete that. If there is any significant change to what we consulted on and what we agreed in the long-term plan, then we are required to do an LTP amendment. The definition of significant is kind of in council's hands. We've got a significant engagement policy that can direct us, and ultimately it's kind of our call what we deem as significant, whether we need to engage the public, and also it would require an audit if we had to do a long-term plan amendment. Not something that we kind of have time or money to do. But the main thing I wanted to stress is we also have limited financial capacity for significant change, which you'll see shortly. All throughout this, I've brought it back to what we planned to do in the long-term plan, because you should be well aware of that. We had a lot of conversations around setting that budget, and we know that we're really restrained in that 27 financial year. We've also had a lot of workshops around waters in, waters out, what the picture looked like, and we know how tight we are to our rates cap and our debt cap. In those later years of waters had been in. Our long-term plan was prepared with waters out from 1 July 27, but we know that 30 June 27 year was always going to be a real tough one. So the next page, just a reminder of the key financial factors. That first paragraph there is like the point of the financial strategy. The main themes to that are ensuring rates affordability, financial flexibility, focusing on efficiency and effectiveness in order to maximise value for money and limit the use of debt. So that was kind of our rule of thumb and our financial strategy that is contained within the long-term plan, and the rules that we kind of always reverted back to when we were setting the operating budgets last year and CapEx budgets.
Amanda?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you think do you think the approved limit for the benchmarking will go down or be revisited as a result of waters not being part of council? Because I see that's still sitting, so we're well within our benchmark. But I would have assumed that as we lose a lot of our rates take, which being for water, I don't know if that's the same or not, that will go down quite substantially, and we might be still struggling within our affordability benchmarks.
I'm not sure. It's not something that's been publicly spoken about. There's no signals from LGFA around that whatsoever. There is a completely different debt cap for CCOs, water CCOs, so they can borrow up to 500%. So that's standalone. And I think when LGFA considers the council ones, it's looking at the whole picture as well, like
the water as well.
Yeah, the group, yeah. And this is without a Standard & Poor's rating as well, the 175%. So we did talk about getting a credit rating. We could increase that limit. So this is the lowest limit that a council could possibly have currently. I haven't heard any rumours of it being reduced.
I was going to say, if it includes water, and we'll go to you in a second, Alex. If it includes water, then does water then come back into our debts affordability benchmarking? Because what it feels like is we've taken out waters, but we've not taken out the effective waters on our approved limit.
So that was going to be my point. The borrowing limit is as a percentage of your revenue. So that isn't changing, but you've got to recognise that with waters not in council, your actual revenue has gone down by a third. So the actual amount you can borrow will have gone down, but as a percentage of your revenue, it remains the same. So actual amount goes down because we have less revenue, unless we go and find ways of generating more revenue, of course.
No, sorry, that makes sense. Sorry, back to you, Amanda.
Yep. So in terms of the debt forecast, in 2027, we had forecast it to be at 140% of our total revenue. Note that that's getting quite close to that benchmark of 175% of total revenue. And we know from our experience with the workshops we've had around waters, if waters had stayed in, that trend would have continued and we would have breached in the 28 financial year. But with the decision for waters to move out, we are safely under that benchmark in those later years, and hopefully we can keep it that way.
John, sorry, do you mind taking questions throughout? Is that okay? John.
So in the mix with that, Amanda, have we allowed for the hidden, I suppose, stranded overheads and everything else when water mixes together and some of the costs that we haven't budgeted for? Is there an allowance in here for that number?
Yeah, so there is still, in the LTP, we still had some stranded overheads in there. We hadn't worked out to the nth degree exactly what was going to go with waters. But the direct costs, the direct people involved and associated building costs and all those overhead costs that were directly associated with waters are removed. But there will be some right sizing in the general business after water goes.
Yeah.
And probably for the first couple of years, it'll be a bit of a mismatch as well. There might be some things that we're still contracting back. So even if we do have those extra costs that we're holding, if we're providing services to the water CCO, there should be the compensating revenue for providing that service. So it should net off.
So it'll be just a cash flow thing and the bulk of it, just to make sure that we on the right side of the ledger while that goes on.
Yeah. So in this budget, in the 27 budget that we've currently drafted, there has been some tweaks around our presumptions around waters, but overall we feel it largely nets off. So we'll be compensated from the water CCO for any costs associated with us delivering any part of water after 1 July 27.
You good? Thanks.
So in terms of rates, we kept it at 9.44% in this current financial year, 2026, and we were able to reduce it to 7% in the LTP year 2. Note it is breaching the target of 5%, but has a decreasing trend. That funny 17% decrease is when we no longer rate for waters in the 28 financial year, and instead the waters CCO separately charges for water.
So just to clarify, that's fine, except that later on in this brief summary, you propose that the proposed 7% increase jumped to 9%. Is that correct?
Yep, so I'm just reminding you of what we set in the long-term plan, and then
Right.
when I get to a later slide, yeah, the budgets that we're forecast at the moment are sitting closer to 9. Yeah, so I guess the point of this slide is just to recall the lessons we learned through the long-term plan and the decisions and the direction that was given then in the financial strategy. And I guess the main thing I wanted to emphasize, this 27 financial year was always going to be financially pretty tough, but we will be financially sustainable once waters moves to a CCO. So next slide. Just a
Question on the slide. I'm really puzzled by those figures. If you look at 2026 and 2027, there's basically we've got about 3 mil extra in rates. But there's a massive $20 million reduction in grants, subsidies and donations, so that the total income drops from 95 to 80.
Yep.
So what's going on with grants, subsidies and donations?
Yep. So our revenue in 27 is kind of back to normal. So we had those big years in 25 and 26 when there was extra funding received from third parties for the Network Waitaki Sports and Event Centre, $15 million funding from the trust, a lot of external funding for the Forrester Gallery, and then the Kakanui Bridge was about a $10 million project that 57% of that was covered by NZTA. So yeah, 27, we knew we were going to be getting back to normal in terms of revenue. The increase in rates, you can see jumping from 46 to 51 to 54. That's the 46 to 51 is the 9.44% that we set for this financial year. And then 51 to 54 is the 7% that we had budgeted in the long-term plan. And then this is where you pointed out earlier. I've been across the board, had a good look at how we're tracking so far this financial year, sat with every single manager in the organisation, had a look at all of their ins and outs in terms of their specific departments, and looking at the funding needs to support our expenditure, which is on the next slide we'll talk about shortly. So the forecast currently require a 9% increase in rates as opposed to the 7% we forecast next year, which will make more sense when we get to the next slide. But
Can I ask a question now?
Yep.
So you and I have talked about this before, and yeah, we're splitting out waters from the organisation. Have we got any way of showing how much of that rates increase is attributable to what we have to do in that water space versus the rest of the organisation? And I ask that because I think over the past couple of years, essentially, you know, if we'd just taken the rates increase attributable to water, that the overall rates increase would have been higher. And we've effectively, as a council, been cutting back on other things to dampen the rate rise that is necessary to invest in water. So I think there's something about ourselves and our community being clear on where the investment is going and what's generating that rate rise, and that, you know, water is going to be separated out going forward.
So waters is a tough one, because we actually earn more revenue than we need to for waters. So it's kind of subsidising the rest of the organisation at this point. And then a big one with waters costs for 27 is the fact that we didn't fund depreciation. So it's not really an accurate picture, because there's 10 million of waters depreciation costs that we are not rating for.
That we're obviously going to have to rate for looking forward through the, or someone will have to.
Can I just clarify that swing, because, the Waters didn't used to subsidise the rest of the council, that swing occurred because of the decision around not funding depreciation of water. Is that how that swing essentially came about?
Yeah, it's a big part of it. Yeah. Yeah, it's material, like 10 million is about a 5% rates rise. So it meant that the waters, what we rated people for waters the previous year was actually higher. So this financial year it's decreased. If you just look at what we rated for waters, it's decreased because we haven't funded for depreciation.
Just a question about that.
Yeah,
if I may.
Mike, yeah.
Was the decision, I'm sorry, I'm racking my brains here, but the depreciation decision we've just been discussing, was that predicated on a decision not to replace, i.e. in other words, if certain elements of the infrastructure weren't to be replaced, we wouldn't need to depreciate them. So was it predicated on that, or was it predicated on the fact that the depreciation would in fact be transferred to the CCO and they would absorb that cost?
Both. So I guess, yeah, it's best practice to depreciate for your
If you
assets like that. Yeah.
Eventually, but
Yeah.
not if you're not.
Yeah, it's getting a balance because we're rate funding, so we don't want to. The current ratepayers don't want to be charged for the interest of the debt, and then to be rate funded for it as well. Like you're kind of double dipping in the current year, so it's getting that right balance across the life of the asset. But then it's also best practice to put these costs aside as well. Like we know from future years that we have quite a lot of reactive maintenance. We know our pipes into the ground aren't flash now, costing us a lot of money. Depreciation is kind of guesswork. So if we get our guesses wrong and something breaks down earlier, it would be nice to have those reserve funds sitting there. So there's lots of reasons for it. And then obviously when we got our response to our water services delivery plan, I think it was a preference to fund for depreciation as well. It's just best practice that any organisation would do. So ideally we would turn it back on, but as the numbers say, we can't really afford to do that this year. It would require another 5% rates on top of the 9% that I've currently forecast.
So when did we move to unfunding depreciation?
Yeah.
It was direction given in the long-term plan to keep.
So yeah, just for context to those who weren't with us last triennium. So the last council was concerned about the rates impact on the community, particularly the amount that we were having to put in there that was essentially funding the water programme. And so there was a request for a number of options to help bring that rates increase down. And one of those options presented was around unfunding depreciation of water assets. But it was recognised that would need to go back in at some point. That was putting off increases rather than actually stopping increases forever in that space. So it was a short-term decision to mitigate the impact of rates rises on the community.
Or kicking the can down the road, isn't it? It's a hard one.
Yeah, it's difficult.
You took the words out of my mind.
Thank you, Amanda. Oh, sorry.
Yes, so I think, point of clarification, that decision would have been made around the time that we had actually unanimously voted to join Southern Waters. And I have a feeling that some of the decision regarding depreciation was predicated on the notion that we would lose waters from 2020 onwards. Therefore, certain amounts of depreciation could be actually removed from the budget because they were no longer going to be our responsibility. So it wasn't just a mad reckless. I mean, yes, there was a decision, there was a need to keep rates down, but it wasn't just an impulsive whim and stroke of a pen.
No, I think I appreciate that. It was probably more than on the governance front because the changes that were looming that then didn't end up looming at all and then are looming again, if you will. Councillor.
So I know we've had this discussion before, Amanda, but what exactly are the rules around depreciation? Because the book entry, we don't actually physically have the cash, but we must be showing it to have it for replacement. So if you build a new house and it's worth X amount of dollars, you have the choice privately to depreciate or do whatever yourself, and you say, I can do it in 10 years, and then we can stash some more away to do some stuff in another 10 years. So you're paying for it and you're actually starting to build the equity, or do you have to have it at all?
Yeah, so it's an accounting process. It's on paper, but it also could be in cash, like, because if we did fund for depreciation, we would be receiving that income. So in that current financial year, so we could put it in a fund and just hold it there in a bank account or whatever. But we use it, it comes part of the pot that we use to balance the books otherwise. But it's sitting there in a reserve to be used for that purpose.
So it shows as a debt and a liability in the books as well as an asset as far as income and out. So it nets itself off. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's an expense and then it sits as an asset as well.
So we borrow off itself.
It's getting the balance between future generations. You're funding it now for the future. Putting aside, presume it lasts 10 years, you're putting aside a tenth every single year so that at the end, when it's due for replacement, you have that money either sitting in cash or you've in reserve.
I'll just get Paul to jump in.
The explain, it is a deliberate choice about essentially which generation pays for the use of the asset. And when going back to 89 and some of the changes, and then certainly in 2000 with the long-term plan, because depreciation had been not even recognised and ignored, there was very much a decision you need to fund a depreciation to have some funds available to replace your assets. We're now getting into the stage where it's like, there's more of a choice about, well, how much does this current generation pay for the assets they're using versus also paying for the assets that may be required into the future. I mean, you could take the position that actually all we're going to do is loan fund everything, run them to the end of their life, and then borrow the full cost to replace them, and then repay the debt over the life of the asset. Now that's the space we're in now, making those kinds of choices about who's the most appropriate person to pay for the use of the asset they've got. So in the past, it used to be, we need to get money because there isn't sufficient funds in any council to actually do any kind of replacement. We've been doing that for 20-something years, and now it's, okay, we're starting to replace things. We're loan funding. Do we fully loan fund it and then repay the loan over the life, or do we charge people before the assets expire and actually collect some funds and reserves? I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, we talk about house just to try and get people to understand a mortgage, but it's, your house doesn't last forever effectively, and that's what these assets do, because you're replacing a bit of them all the time. It's more the classic grandfather's axe, who pays for the new head and the new handle, and then the new head and the new handle and the new handle, and do you just do that when it breaks, or do you save something? So I think this is one of the big debates, the big changes in mindset that we sort of need to make in this space about what's the appropriate amount when you're starting to renew a lot of assets, and how much debt should you use, and how much you should charge directly on the people in any one year. And council made the decision, actually it's time to looking into the future, actually be a bit more neutral on this, and we can afford to run up a bit of debt, and people have been paying a lot in their rate accounts in the depreciation, because it was virtually fully funded for a number of years. So it's just, as Amanda said, it's getting that balance right, given what your community is facing, the age of your assets and everything else. I mean, this is the same sort of dilemma that the new boards will be faced about in their charges, about how much do they increase, how much do they collect from this year, and the more robust asset planning you have, the more confident you can be in making those decisions.
So there's no audit expectations around your level of depreciation funding?
Their expectations are that you disclose if you're not having a balanced budget, and so not funding depreciation is probably the biggest reason you don't have a balanced budget. So you need to disclose that to your communities and make a decision that actually you're comfortable with that. The thing that audit looks at is the actual
level of renewal compared to your level of depreciation and seeing what gap is in there. So in the last couple of years, in some of ours, we've been well over we've replaced far more than the level of depreciation, but typically the sector's around 80 to 85%, but which is they're actually fine with, because it's like you go along, and if it's just pipes, then that, but then you hit we have to replace the treatment plant, and that's $50 million in a 2-year span, and that blows it out completely. So they sort of are taking a longer term view, and that's certainly something the regulator will be looking at, that relationship between your level of replacement compared to how much you're diminishing the assets. So yeah, it used to be easy when it's just, you fund everything. Don't make any decision, just grab the money out of the community, because we're going to need it sooner rather than later. But I think we've moved over to a different space and time and having far more of a mix between direct funding and use of debt. Is that for a long explanation?
Sven.
Yeah, there's the justification for the debt funding of everything often is exactly that, spreading across the generations. There's a difference sort of between whether it's a new asset or a renewed asset. And if the renewed asset was paid for by previous generations, and the renewal was going to be paid for by future generations, as a generation in the middle possibly not paying its way too. But my question would be more around the new assets. Do we have a policy, or is there something in the long-term plan? We'll just take, for example, the event centre as a big one, obviously. Are we intending to both pay down the debt and depreciate that, or are we just going to do one, just pay down the debt?
Current policy is to look at the individual assets and look at their life. So probably the aquatic centre is the best, most relevant example. It's anything with basically under a 20-year life. Where policy is to fund the depreciation on those, because they are going to be replaced for as part of just sort of the ongoing. And it's about the shell of the building. That's not depreciated, because actually the decision is that when that reaches the end of its life, that will be a totally new decision about what replaces it and how that's funded. And really, the people that have been using it have funded it all. So it's all new cost going forward. So sort of start anew, forget about that one, and think about it as a new project, not a renewal. But like would fix the roof, but not the structure.
There is an underlying policy and a schedule by asset class and some specific individual assets as well. It's not in the LTP document itself, but it's a key underlying document I can share with you.
Thank you.
So what I'm trying to get at, it's giving us cash flow really by calling it depreciation, because if you look at those figures, half of the total rates intake is actually depreciation and amortization. So 50% is gone before you even can do the rest of your sums. So what I'm trying to say, we lend it to ourselves, but we call it depreciation, even though I'm sort of getting lost a bit here, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. I hope.
Well, in an ideal world, we would be able to fund for depreciation, and it wouldn't be such a big rates rise, because it just would have always been they started depreciating in the 80s. So our pool of depreciation reserves is not significant. Some of them are non-existent. But if they'd started that 100 years ago, then we'd be all set now. So it's like, when do we start writing the process? I don't think 27 is the right year for us to do that. The new CCO for waters will be able to set all of that water charges appropriately, decide their balance between what level of depreciating, what level of water charges versus debt funding. It's up for them to decide.
And just going on from what Paul just said, so the building like this should have no depreciation, because it should be written off as with the age of the building.
I can't remember the specific building off the top of my head, but yeah, like the shell of the aquatic centre, we don't fund for depreciation. It also can consider funding, so like roading, 57% of it we effectively don't pay for, we get the funding for. So we only depreciate the other portion of it that we've funded, because that's all the money that we need to put aside for the future. So there's lots of different decisions. I'll share the policy with everyone, because it also explains the reasoning for the different ones as well.
Well,
Thank you.
We're not depreciating this places like this building because we would not replace this building like for like. What we are doing is depreciating things in this building, like the carpets and other things that may need to be replaced. So there is a rationale behind what we have decided to fund and what we've decided not to fund, and you've explained part of that. But if at some point this building, for the sake of argument, became untenable or surplus to requirements, what would replace it would be so radically different that the funding for it would be likely radically different as well.
Thanks, Mandy.
Yeah, so I guess the main point that I was trying to make on the revenue side of things is there's very little other levers that we can pull in terms of our revenue streams, and our rates revenue represents the bulk of it. So that's where we always come back to what is the right level of rates increase that our community can sustain. The other side of the fence, our revenue is set based on our expenses. So I guess the main point here, the bottom line, we always predicted in 2027 that we were going to be loss making. This was a huge area that we talked a lot about through the LTP process. It was getting the balance between the rates levels that we felt that our community could cope with versus balancing our budget. So balancing the budget is ensuring that you have enough income to cover your costs. With a $14 million loss, that means we have $14 million higher expenditure than our income. The only way we could fix that 14 million loss would be via rates. There's no other revenue streams that we could pull that would bring in $14 million. And we weren't comfortable to increase rates that much last time. So this is where we ended up in the long-term plan. In terms of the specific line items, personnel costs, I think we've talked quite a lot in the performance audit and risk committee throughout the year. That is tracking higher than budget. The actual personnel costs, so the budget in 2025 was significantly higher in the actual 2025 annual report. So it's predicted to do so in 27 as well. The depreciation, I feel, will probably sit at around the 27 mil in 27. It is higher, it's tracking higher throughout this 26 financial year because we had really higher revaluation increase at 30 June 25 than we expected. So that means what we budgeted for depreciation through 26 is actually a lot higher in reality. But I think in 27 it probably should go back to about the 27 million that we've predicted there, just because of the timing of our capital projects, which we will come to later. So where we haven't completed all of the capital projects as we intended, that means that depreciation will be lower in that 27 year. Finance costs, I'm thinking, will be pretty much as budgeted. So our outstanding debt balance is probably going to be very similar to as budgeted at 30 June 26. And it's quite dependent on the timing of our capital projects as well, but I think it will be around the 4.5 million. And then other expenses. So this is where I have sat with all the departmental managers, and we have, we're very conscious that the cost of living crisis, and although costs are increasing, similar to last year, we have tried to restrain our budgets, stick to our knitting. There's no nice to haves in the budgets. They've been critiqued through the executive leadership team. And yeah, so we are tracking in line with forecast currently. Around 40 million is expected for the 26 financial year. And I expect 2027 will increase, but that will largely be due to the renewals projects. So the waters projects that are not added to the balance sheet. So it's when we're replacing like for like as opposed to brand new assets. So yeah, there's necessary contractor costs and things like that will be incurred in there, and some other projects that aren't capitalised.
So Amanda, just a quick question in this, I guess around the wider global context at the moment. Do we keep feeding into our budgets in the lead up now onto where things are at to understand how we could be affected by things like your fuel costs, or is it too much pie in the sky? We can't guess these things. Like, I guess I'm trying to understand what the balance of risk is there for there'd be massive blowouts next year if all of our fuel costs, for instance, are up in every activity and we're having to cover that sort of thing.
Yeah, so in terms of fuel costs and I guess the wider inflation, so the current forecasts have applied, we use Burl indices, so all local government entities use the same one in setting their long-term plan. So the last ones we received were when we finalised the long-term plan, like so May last year, I think. So they were in the final version that we adopted in June. And we haven't had a revised version, so expect that that will come before June. So when we apply new inflation rates, especially in terms of fuel costs, that will go up. But I guess that's what I'm talking about in renewals as well. So the main increase in other expenses are in those types of areas, like your parks and recs contract and things, things like that, where it will incur quite a lot of fuel costs are likely to increase. Other renewal projects will have an element of fuel costs built into those contracts as well. So yeah, it's largely in the contractor expenses and project related costs those will go up.
So essentially our estimates and things, when we do get that level of information in, will then change as a result. So
yeah,
in the current situation, you'd probably be looking at some relatively substantial increases potentially.
Yeah, pretty substantial in terms of fuel costs, the numbers that have been thrown around at the moment, even the costs that we've seen in the last few weeks of 500 a week or something, like just pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen there? It's hard to forecast.
I don't have an answer to that, but I think we just need to be mindful of that in this mix as well.
That's a really good point.
John?
Yeah, sorry, given that we are spending 63.5 million on personnel and other expenses, and our rates revenue is 54.5 million, that's about a $9 million overspend on our guaranteed income. Are we certain that the other income streams that are listed here are going to come to fruition?
I think in the 27 financial year, we are more certain than we have been for a number of years. You will recall in the annual report in 2024 and 2025, our revenue was lower than we forecast, largely in those grants and subsidies. And there's a lot of timing differences for the event centre, some other funding that didn't eventuate at the time we expected it to. So in those last two financial years, actual costs were significantly higher than our income, because our income was lower than it was expected and our costs were much higher than we'd predicted, higher inflation rates and things.
Thank you, but we are vulnerable.
Very, yeah. I guess that's a point to make. The 25 annual plan here that it shows, we forecast a surplus of 7.3 million and we had a loss of 2.3 million. So that was a difference of 10 million. That was just lower revenue than we expected and higher costs. And that 10 million, we have to debt fund. We don't have other levers, other revenue streams that we can just pull at the last minute like that. We can't subsequently go back and increase our rates that were set at before 1 July for that financial year. That's why it's really crucial that we set rates appropriately before the start of the financial year.
So that 14 mil, will that go on the debt as well, essentially? And to increase rates, would that be essentially opening up the annual plan again, and be a significant change? We have to consult and go down that path.
It depends how high we go, I guess, what we deem as significant. But yeah, that 14 million deficit, that's where our reserves come into play. All are pulling from our depreciation reserves and other various reserves that we've got.
Oh, sorry, I mean, but that does include $27 million of depreciation, which is why we had the the conversation before, I mean, I was looking at it, that's increased by a third in the space of 2 years. Which is, well, we're going to have some real challenges in a rates capped environment if you're seeing that kind of cost increase being driven into a budget and you're capped about the amount of rates you can increase. That's why I think those discussions we will have on an ongoing basis about how much of that depreciation is funded will just be increasingly important, because that line item is probably the most volatile one that you're looking at. If you look at the other costs, other expenses as well controlled. On trading losses, you can't do much about those. Finance costs, well, we understand those and they'll stabilise as sort of the debt stabilises, and personnel costs, well, it's understand that wage inflation is a real thing, but the one that's really making the difference across those the years is the depreciation and amortisation. So it's going to be even with water out, it is still going to be a very big line item that is having a significant impact on the budget.
I was going to say that 27,000 is without that 10,000, million, without that 10 million of water's unfunded depreciation as well.
But the other thing,
Sorry,
the
Jim.
problematic issue is, in a sense, you're kicking the can down the road, as we have been accused of doing, because anything you don't fund via depreciation, you're going to have to fund through loans. For the sake of argument, if we said the new treatment plant, we won't depreciate the full 50 million replacement cost, we'll only depreciate, say, 35, then bingo, you've got to fill that other 15 mil that void with a loan.
Well, the other thing is not replacing things when they reach the end of their life.
Oh, yes, that's the other option.
That's the harder decision, and I think one that will need to be made more often, that actually we can't sustain that type of facility, that level of service into the future, and start running, adjusting the service or how it's delivered.
And I guess that comes into that balance again around if we're still paying for something in a loan sense, or paying off a loan on something, should we be depreciating it at the same time? Because then our current ratepayers are paying for what they're putting in now and for the future at the same time.
Yes.
So there's certainly an argument in that one too. Back to you, Amanda.
Sorry for that. Yeah. Just well, you're employed to work all this out, Amanda, because we're spending.
I'm just giving you the picture. You guys make the decision. Tell me what to do.
We're spending $9 million more just running business as usual than we're actually taking in rates.
Yeah, so there is a consideration about what's the right level of rates. And Paul touched on the rates capping in the future as well. So, this is kind of our last chance. We have a rates cap in the years beyond 27. We will be really constrained. If we're not putting funds aside for depreciation, what do we do when things break? We're nearing our net debt cap as well. So it's a really tough, everything's come to roost at the same point.
Because we do have an option through the rates capping to go, but that then becomes a public, do you want to spend this or have this level of rates increase discussion.
Yeah.
For now, like I'm guessing if we are sitting at a 9%, there's going to be potentially central government looking at that, because they have said there's a date on the rates cap, but before that there needs to be a clear explanation as to why we're not already working in that space. Is that real?
No, I think this is the last year you'll get a pass. They'll start scrutinising the next LTP and the projected increase in those, because they haven't even said what the rates cap is. They haven't passed the legislation. They haven't said how it's going to be calculated. So, I think that they might comment on it, but without legislation, without a guidance of how it's calculated or what's in and out, that's going to be quite important. If they cut out roading and said, oh, well, we realise this is a fundamental service and it's, you need to fund what you need to fund, especially if they're going to cut the subsidy that we're receiving. And they might carve that piece out and say it's the rest of it. We don't know, and I don't think they know at the moment. That it's just they've just said we like the concept, but they're still working through how it will work in practice. But there won't be any, could be comment, but there's nothing that can be done about it in this cycle. And also it's, with water still in there, it's,
Because I did think I'd heard a different message from the minister, which was a little bit more directive saying, it won't be in law, but we will be expecting clarification from council. So more of a please explain, I would have thought, than a comment, but something to be aware of, I guess. John.
Yeah, I thought I'd heard somewhere, I don't know where it was at a meeting somewhere that if it can be proved as infrastructure, that could be exempt of the rates capping. But that's further down the track. And as you say, it's not a law yet, which may or may not happen. I suppose what concerns me, the whole thing, reading all through this, and I know waters will move sideways, the bill coming to the person that pays the rates that's what we're going to look at on both bills. It doesn't matter what we look at this one, as long as both of them add up to be no more than what we're actually aiming at the minute. It's not easy.
Okay, so that's
Can I just ask one very minor question on that page, if I may? I noticed that the bullet point 3 talked about 12 million in additional projects largely due to WSDP requirements. The actual change moved below is 10 million. That's about 2 million less. I'm just wondering why that is.
Okay, so this slide is talking about our capital projects. So this is the huge listing that we went through in the long-term plan process. I'm not going to get into detail of the specific projects within it, but at an overall level, we budgeted to have about 60 million odd in the 26 financial year. So about 30 mil is our rule of thumb about what has historically been achievable. And then we felt that we were comfortable with 60 because of the network at Waitaki Event Centre, Forester Gallery and Kakanui Bridge also had a lot of external support in them, and they were funded quite separately, so it didn't have quite a huge burden on our financials. So in terms of setting the long-term plan, our future years, we tried to keep a rule of thumb of around 30 million. You may recall, like when the Waters team came and spoke to us, I think they had project listing of about 30 million every single year. And just because of our ability to deliver and our financial situation, we reduced that to around 15 million each year. So these figures that we're now projecting for the 27 annual plan are quite significant. To explain the table, the long-term plan 2026 of 60 mil, and then carry forwards are things that I've touched base with the managers, and they're not going to have those complete and paid off by 30 June 2026. They might be at the point of out for tender or various stages, but we will not be signed off or paid for before 30 June. So, and they're all must do. So when we went through the long-term plan, these were the projects we landed in 2026 were what was required to happen in that financial year. So the team's recommended carrying those forward into the 27 budget. So the middle column, LTP 27, is what we felt was financially achievable, and in terms of resourcing, achievable in that financial year. It's kind of going back to normal without extra add-ons like event centres and galleries. So we felt that 27 was more than achievable at the 30 mil, then adding the carry forwards of 15 mil, and then the changes. So as we sat through the water services delivery plan workshops, you remember Stu had some tables and some extra projects that were added on through that process. So that was about $12 million worth. And then there has been about $2 million worth of projects that the Waters team, infrastructure team and PMO have suggested can be deferred into 28 or beyond. So there's a few different projects that represents. Yeah, so this is the necessities. We went through the long-term plan. There was about 260 projects in the project listing. We looked at it lots of different ways in terms of the council's community outcomes, in terms of area, in terms of the amount of people that each project delivered for. So there's lots of different ways that we tried to cut it to prioritise what projects we put in the long-term plan. And these are what we felt were the must-do projects and the time frames that they needed to be delivered. A lot of these waters ones are necessary in accordance with legislation. There is key timeframes that we have to deliver drinking water standards, like a lot of our Corridor water schemes, a couple of our other water schemes need to be up to standard, potential new changes in that space, quite a lot of wastewater work, very little stormwater work. That was something that was touched on in the water services delivery plan. We haven't added any extra in. We don't have capacity to do so. So these that we felt in the long-term plan are the must-dos. I think a rule when we set these budgets, we wanted what we put in the plan to do for 27 to match what we're putting in our water services delivery plan as well. So I think the team across the board, we found very little ways to change this 37 million that's forecast for 27 for Three Waters. Do you guys have anything to add in that space? Agree. In terms of roading, so there's a bit of deferrals there. Things just timing wise are not going to be signed off by 30 June. 10 million, circa 10 million has been achievable in the past for the roading team. And that's about the required level of must-dos in that space. One-off projects I think we're all familiar with. There was a council decision pre-Christmas to go ahead with phase 2 of the event centre, so the grandstand. And then there's quite a lot of movements in here. There's a few things that were felt to be necessities in 26 that aren't going to be finished on top of the 4.3 that was budgeted in 27. And we have also made the decision to defer what in the scheme of things are not now felt to be must-do projects. So the refit of this building, there was a budget in there to do some improvements to the skate park, those sorts of things. So the remaining other projects is 3.5 million there. The most significant ones that you should be familiar with, the digital services program, the final stages of our transformation, getting all of our internal and external digital services up to scratch, so that our community can engage with us better and get information easily. District plan review, that's costs a lot of money. That's back on the table next year. The investment in tourism. So last year that was cut in half from the original budget that was put forward and reduced to 455,000. That has been retained in this budget at that level. So whether you feel that is still appropriate, but that's what the team has put forward at the moment. So that did have a significant reduction in the prior year. I am aware that you've been provided some information from the eyesight. So that hasn't been factored into the budget at this point. There's a lot of extra costs that we've put in local bill to remove prohibiting legislation on council land. We consulted last year in the long-term plan about a whole list of property that we would be hoping to sell to bring in extra money to reduce debt. So that's to enable that to happen. Some work at the airport, the freezer building, making safe is a necessity, and some required maintenance on the breakwater. So those are the top ones, totaling that 3.5 million. We have scrutinised these listings. There was a lot of ways that we cut it and tried to prioritise it, thinking about different community views, and that was the mix that we landed on. But yeah, you can see the bulk of it there is Three Waters, and that's the figure that we will be putting in our final water services delivery plan. So we kind of felt that our hands were tied. We had to be consistent in this budget.
I was going to say your red line in the middle of that slide is probably the real red flag in this whole conversation, isn't it? And I understand, I guess it's the Three Waters has driven the majority of that, but obviously there is a requirement to get up to certain timeframes by a certain time and feed into a services delivery plan. I guess what I'm asking is that achievability? How do we factor that in, or do we, like, I feel like we know that's not achievable, but we are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Is that a fair comment?
That is a fair comment, and I think if we don't do anything differently, it won't be achievable. And I think, we'll carry on the scrutiny of that, but we're also discussing how do we deliver this in a different way, and what do we do? What aspects of this potentially could sit with others to develop, but with our, supervision, for example, because we don't have the capacity internally to deliver all of that ourselves. So looking at different ways of delivering it, and I won't get into individual projects on that, but we have some thoughts about some of those and how those might be delivered using minimal capacity. But if it's council expenditure, it's always going to use some capacity because we need to be confident that we're getting value for the ratepayer money that's going into those.
John, then Jim.
Yeah, I think Mel touched on it before. It's the writing in red that's really concerning. The carry forwards, we had that resolution carried that nothing gets carried forward, or if it is, it is the equivalent is removed in the next annual plan. To me, we're strung out with the three waters in the roading. They're essential services that we must look at, but I don't think we can afford to do any more capital projects for the considerable future. And in saying that, look at what we have done. We've built an event centre, we've got a Forester Gallery, and we've got a Kakanui Bridge for some 30-odd million, I think, off the top of my head, from a population base of ratepayers of 9,500. So at some stage, you've got to pay the piper, and I think we're there plus some at the minute.
I guess we've already approved in earlier in the year another project on top of that, which is don't shush me. Councillor Hopkins.
I guess the key question with the carry forwards would be to what extent the 11,380,000 is will fund projects that are essentially imposed upon us by WSDP or Te Mata Arawai. I'm looking a bit further down, one-off projects. If that 4 million is stage 2 of the event centre, that's staggeringly. I clearly wasn't at the meeting, I think last year. That was when I was in Dunedin being operated upon. But is that 4 million the total cost, or is that our contribution? Because bear in mind that in terms of the stage 1, we haven't funded it all, and I'm wondering if we intend to fund all of stage 2, and if so, is it going to be entirely loan funded or rate funded? And the other brutal fact of the matter is, if we want to hold rates at 7 or even get them down a bit, we're going to have to look at $3.5 million worth of other projects.
So just to clarify, this is the expenditure side of it. So that grandstand is going to be on our books. We're the contracting party, so we will be paying the invoices. So this is just capturing the cost of it. But it's 4 million added to the 2, so it's 6 million. But it's all externally funded. We are not putting cash towards it. So this is just the expense side. And in terms of the previous funding, you did touch on that that we've I can't remember what you said. You said something about the previous funding of the event centre. Just to remind everyone, council's contribution was 15 million of that, so about half of that project. The rest of it was externally funded.
Yes.
And it showed in our budget as 32.8 million, didn't it? Which was the total project cost spread over a couple of years. So the whole project cost, if it's our project, even though it's externally funded, shows on our books and in our budget.
Now, we're just going to have to wrap up because we're out of time. Sorry, we haven't got through all the slides. It's going to be an ongoing, so it's really, what do you need to take away from this conversation, or are we just building our knowledge at this stage and we'll have an option?
Yeah, so this is the last workshop on the finances for the annual plan. So it will be back for approval in June. And I guess the main direction, if we pop to the key takeaway slide, just wanting to get a feel of the room, whether that 9% rates rise is reasonable. I think the capital projects we will keep working on behind the scenes and find a way to make sure that they are achievable. But as Alex touched on, that may require extra resourcing and extra funding as well. And I guess water's depreciation, is everyone comfortable that we're not funding water's depreciation because that would result in a significant rates rise?
I guess I'm just sort of looking around and I could take questions. We've got someone calling in now. It's just a really big discussion for making sure there's some understanding around, and there's probably just some of this that, without going a long way into detail, we still probably need to understand. And I do wonder if this is enough time for us to spend to give you the direction you're looking for. And maybe it's something we take offline and have a discussion about, what do we actually need, if we need anything more, because I don't know if it's more information or if it's more time as a group to actually embed this, because a lot of this is new to some, but I will think as well, there's obviously not a lot of movement we can make, but we need to kind of understand that well before we can say, hey, 9% is something we're comfortable with. I think it's probably just a bit early, but maybe we need to have a catch up and just work on how we just get to that level of comfort and a discomfort. I realise it's not going to ever have a total level of comfort because it's not where we want to sit. But yeah, so John, I'm not sure if I want to look to you. We're out of time.
No, just a point of clarification so I can think. I mean, did I pick you up right that $2 million plus or minus is equivalent to 1% rate rise up or down? Thank you.
So councillors, what we'll do is we'll pick it up a bit later this afternoon as to what more we might need just to have this conversation and to get to a space where we can offer a bit of certainty to staff before it comes to a meeting. Sorry, Mandy. No.
Sorry, can I just let everyone know there was also an additional couple of papers at the request from last week's briefing to bring a comms plan to you all. So that's was in Docs on Tap yesterday. That's just a high level overview of what we've been talking to with the comms plan over the last week. So I need to get that council paper completed tomorrow to go to the 31st of March decision. So if anyone's got any issue, please let me know, but I will incorporate that into the paper as proposed and we can discuss that at the next council meeting.
So councillors, I'm not taking any more questions because we need to end on this, but we will circle back if we get time within the briefing to sort of say what do we want or how do we want to give ourselves a bit of a comfort in this space. So we'll work through with Alex on that and we'll be back in touch. So thank you for all your work on this. I know it's been a lot. Appreciated, and we will finish up there and get on to our call coming in.